It's also a reality that the kind of dominance that the United States had in the 1950s, 60s, or in the 1990s, 2000, it doesn't have. It cannot be that one democracy has a right to comment on another, and that's part about promoting democracy globally. But when others do that, then it becomes foreign interference. Look, you have every right to comment, but I have every right to comment on your comment. So don't feel bad when I do.
Perhaps even in a multi-vector, multipolar world, there is still room to recognize that the U.S. plays a very special role in that world. And as a practical matter, one could point to the presence of the UN, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank here. One can point to the role that Washington still plays, for example, in patrolling international sea lanes.
Sure.
One can point to the role.
Oh, you don't have to convince me. Right. I'm not into. I'm not into declinism.
I'm getting set up to ask you the following question. You know, the tech industry in California. So, with what aspects of that kind of U.S. leadership is India comfortable, and with what aspects of that is India perhaps concerned or might question it?
Look, there is no question that the United States still has a very unique position in the world order. For reasons of polemics or mind games or posturing, people may suggest otherwise, but even the people who suggest otherwise know the truth. At the same time, it's also a reality that the kind of dominance that the United States had in the 1950s, 60s, or in the 1990s, 2000, it doesn't have. So it's a kind of half empty, half full situation. Now, for us, which part works for us? Much of it does. I give you the example of Quad. If you look today on technology issues or maritime safety, security, or supply chain issues, or even the manner in which international institutions should be. I mean, there would be a lot which would be common with the United States. Obviously, there would be some because, look, we are a developing country. Our political history is different. Our actual interests, in some cases, our trade interests or climate action interests may be different. So there would be areas of differences, but if you ask me, saying net, where do you come out? I think we come out very overwhelmingly on the side of a strong relationship, which is why actually the story, if one looks at Indian foreign policy for the last, say, 2 to 3 decades, it's really been a story of steady growth of India-US relationship, because I think successive administrations on both sides, going back, I would say maybe to late Clinton, Vajpayee, I would sort of pick that as the inflection point. I think since then it's been steadily on the up.
So picking up on that, the US and India are among the world's leading countries with democratic forms of government. And here in the US, our democracy, which includes much debate about many issues, sometimes features political leaders in the US making comments about democracy in India. And that has sometimes provoked a crisp response from the External Affairs Ministry, perhaps pointing out that there are members of the Indian diaspora in the US that might have concerns or complaints about racism or about gun violence. I wonder how you think about that dynamic and what potential possibilities you might see for constructive dialogue between the US and India on these issues.
There's one, the reality, and two, the handling of the reality. What's the reality? The reality is the world is very globalized, and as a result, the politics of any country doesn't necessarily stay within the national boundaries of the country. Now, the United States, of course, makes a special effort to ensure it doesn't. That's part of how you've conducted your foreign policy over many years. Now, as in a globalized era where there are also global agendas, there are players who like to shape not only the politics of their own country or their own region, but try and do it globally. And social media, economic forces, financial flows, all these give you opportunities to do that. How do you shape the narrative? So you have a whole industry here, okay? So you write up reports about people, you rank people, you spotlight countries. That's the game. Now, as I said, that's a reality. So what happens with that reality is it's part of the overall competition, a competition among countries and competition among political forces. And when it is a competition, you expect others to do what they will, and it's your right to do what you will. And that's playing out in a way. But if you look at a state to state, government to government level, we think it's important that democracies are mutually respectful. It cannot be that one democracy has a right to comment on another, and that's part about promoting democracy globally. But when others do that, then it becomes foreign interference. Foreign interference is foreign interference, irrespective of who does it and where it is done. So it's a testy area. And my personal view, which I have shared with many counterparts, is, look, you have every right to comment, but I have every right to comment on your comment. So don't feel bad when I do.
Understood. And of course, building on your point, the complexity of how countries get interconnected reflects in part the diasporas that exist and the fact that the U.S. is an immigrant country. So there are many, many people of South Asian origin here, and they have different perspectives. I guess that also highlights another dimension, perhaps, of India's role in the world that I wanted you to comment on a little, which is how India and the Indian government sees its relationships with diasporas, not only in the U.S., but around the world.
We have roughly about something like 18, 19 million Indian nationals who live abroad. These are people with Indian passports. And probably about 14, 15 million people of Indian origin who would have had an Indian passport or would have hailed from India at some point of time, because this goes back to the last century when people didn't have passports. Now, when a country has this 30 million plus constituency out there, it needs to have some kind of thinking, how do you relate to such a large number of people? Because these numbers are only going to grow. When you referred in your initial remarks to technology. I feel today, looking at the current era, if India has something to bring to the table, because there are two ways by which you make space for yourself in the global order. One is to rise quantitatively, which is the GDP growth, etc. But one is also to make yourself important or relevant or indispensable to the global order. People do that by having a resource or having a technology or taking responsibilities. I think there what India can do is definitely bring the people factor, the talent factor into play. And you can do that because of technology. Mm-hmm. That today's era of technology is going to require trained people, trained talent on a scale for which there are very few suppliers in the world, and we are one. So when I contemplate a global workplace, when I look at greater mobility of people, and for me today mobility is probably the most frequent conversations I have with my counterparts. I met 60 odd ministers in the UN. At least 25, 30 of them in some form or the other would have brought up, mobility of people. So we have to have a policy for the global workplace. We have to have a policy for what happens when you have these communities outside. How do you maintain their connection with the mother country?